I have an email from a Carol McElroy at KGO TV in San Francisco. We were talking about them earlier, and when you saw the poor girl get pepper sprayed, the reporter had been badgering her about being a Trump supporter, and then the reporter just kind of stood by and watched. Well, we're supposed to be detached. Well, if somebody was killing somebody, would you stand there and just keep, oh, it looks as if blood is pouring out onto the ground. As I speak, I can also see that the patient is in convulsions. So I made a point that I thought that the coverage was a little bit biased of what was going on there last night, and then mentioned my background. Now, I never worked in a market as big as San Francisco, so probably they tipped their nose up at the fact that I mentioned I was a former television news director. But this Carol McElroy writes back, I sent the email and criticized what had happened. And thanks for your comments. I've taken the liberty of passing them along to our news department. They do appreciate your feedback as well. Remember if you've ever written a letter to a politician and you get that form letter back, dear constituent, I take the time to read every letter, and first of all, you've got crap for brains. We here, of course, work very, very hard, and you people are not aware of that. Why, just last week I was forced to take a junket to a beach in Jamaica with my entire staff, and we had to sit. We were doing a study on resorts, and we had to sit for a week in the hot sun, on the hot sand. I don't think that you realize how hard we actually work for all of you. We work harder than anybody carrying a pack through a mountain pass in Afghanistan. We work harder for anybody fighting terrorists in Yemen, and we work harder than you dairy farmers. So, dear constituent, I thank you for your letter, and I've filed it in the circular bin over here on the side. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. I've been telling you for the last several months about Waddell & Reed, a firm here in Twin Falls that works to invest money for you, which is how you'd prefer it be, right? Waddell & Reed has been in business for 80 years, since 1937. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds, and in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages 2 mutual fund families, and invests with a conservative nature. Waddell & Reed has a good track record. 80 years, folks, is a good track record. And they'll take more of a planning approach and look at each piece of a puzzle that you may have and help you build proper expectations. In fact, they build at Waddell & Reed plans around your own needs and your goals. They help you manage money, and Waddell & Reed takes planning personally. It's 9:36 now on Top Story, and we're at 26. Bill Colley with you until 10 o'clock this morning. Mr. Trump's decision, and I keep hearing people say, the Republicans who keep saying, well, it was done ham-handedly, but of course it's a good idea. What they mean is we're trying to appease the media. We're trying to appease the media by saying, well, it was done ham-handedly. I would have done it differently, being that I am brilliant, and the president isn't. But I support the president because I see the polls over here show that the overwhelming majority of the American people support him. In other words, I'm a two-face, and I've been checking which way the political winds are blowing. Nearly half the country backs the president's executive order on refugees, according to the latest study, that from Reuters. Now, you say, well, okay, that's not half, that's less than half. Well, actually, the number of people who were opposed is really tiny. And then you had a bunch of people in the middle that said, what refugee executive order? I've been watching wrestling. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, UFC's on. Call me back later. This is the third poll in 3 days, and some polls are showing that the numbers, because the way they ask the question, obviously, can be, do you strongly support it? Do you mildly support it? Do you support it just a little? Are you indifferent? Do you strongly disagree with the president? Do you mildly disagree with the president? Do you wish the president would go live on another planet? So the polls, this is the third straight day. Some of these polls overwhelmingly show figures up around 60% in support of this. But the numbers who are opposed are really tiny. And so you've got the liberals and you've got the media and even a lot of Republican politicians. You would have thought that the politicians themselves in his own party would have learned their lesson by now. Oh, well, this guy can never win. He's assaulted an American hero, John McCain. And he kept winning. Well, he can't win because, of course, he insulted Mexicans and rapists while he was at it, too. You know, rapists deserve a good hearing in our country. We were talking about it in my committee the other day. And he kept winning. Well, then he impugned the nature of Ted Cruz's father, and while I can't stand Ted, I don't believe that anybody should have this type of insult thrown at them. And then Mr. Trump kept winning. Well, he was on that bus with Billy Bush, and he said something about women's private parts, and can no longer support him. He needs to withdraw from the race. Now, if he had said something along the lines of, Billy, I kind of like you. Oh, how brave he is. Liberals would have loved him then. Well, I can no longer support him. And then it turned out he kept winning. Well, we're still going to lose to Hillary Clinton. And then he won. Well, gosh, the president is a wonderful guy. Jay Willikers. But then he comes out with the order on refugees and immigrants. Well, which way is the wind blowing? Oh, the president's no longer a wonderful guy. Oh, wait a minute, he is. Yeah. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and News Radio 30. The politicians, the ones who probably matter, they're all working right now. So they didn't likely hear that. But, that's what the public thinks of you. Just in case you didn't know. You may think that you're the Lord of the Manor, but it's not quite that way with the public. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX, News Radio 1310.com. Some bad news I've got to share with you coming up about self-driving automobiles. You know how politicians work. I can remember about 15 years ago, not quite 15 years ago, when gasoline first crossed the $2 a gallon mark. And we were not used to that, and it was a little bit of a shock for many of us who were doing a lot of driving at the time. Luckily, I was driving a tiny Honda Civic, so I got somewhat of a break. I had really good gas mileage. But Congress decided to hold hearings, and they called in all of these oil executives because they were selling a product that they managed to extract on their own and then refine on their own. And, if I'm selling shoes, I don't know that if I decided to raise the price, maybe to cover some of my expenses, that I would ever be called in front of a congressional committee to explain why I had raised my price. After all, it's their product, and isn't that how capitalism works? But they decided to call them in, so all of these oil executives who pretty much bankroll all of these politicians all came in and sat down at a table, and, you're waiting for the oil executives were polite, but you were waiting for them. Rex Tillerson was one of them. You were waiting for them to sit down and stare across at the senators holding the hearings and say, just remember, you work for me. So the cameras come on, and there's Chuck Schumer, currently now the leader of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate, the minority leader. And there's Chuck Schumer, and somebody says, Senator Schumer, the cameras are all on. Bad oil company. Bad oil company. Oh, Senator Schumer, somebody just turned the camera off. Do you have any campaign cash for me today? Senator Schumer, the camera's back on. Bad oil company. Bad oil company. 944, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 25. Telephone number to reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300, and my email address, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Story I found, I was looking at this at spectrum.ieee.org. Not that I look at this website a lot, but it was linked on Real Clear Science yesterday. The self-driving cars bicycle problem. The liberals are all excited about having not only electric automobiles. Of course, we're still going to have to burn lots of coal and oil to generate the electricity for them, but you overlook that part of it if you're a liberal. Well, it's like trying to explain to them that $20 trillion in debt came about because we were spending a lot of money on these programs to make everybody fair and equal. And that by doubling that again in the next 10 years will likely just collapse the country. Doesn't matter to them because it's all about, well, that'd be mean-spirited if you don't give me more of that money. Robotic cars, the writer says, are great at monitoring other cars, and they're getting better at noticing pedestrians, squirrels, and birds. Saw a squirrel that had been splattered in my neighborhood a few days ago, and I got thinking, how did that happen? I thought they were quicker than that. And nobody can drive in my neighborhood very fast considering the icy conditions and the big S-curves. The main challenge, though, is posed by the lightest, quietest, swerviest vehicles on the road, according to this writer. And there's a quote here. Bicycles are probably the most difficult detection problem that autonomous vehicle systems face. That from a research engineer named Stephen Schledover, and he's at Berkeley. I wonder if he survived last night. And then another fellow by the name of Nuno Vasconcelos, he's a visual computing expert at the University of California, San Diego, says bikes pose a complex detection problem because they are relatively small, fast, and heterogeneous. Heterogeneous, is that how that's pronounced? And here's a quote from him. A car is basically a big block of stuff. A bicycle has much less mass. And also, there can be more variation in appearance. There are more shapes and colors, and people hang stuff on them. That's why the detection rate for cars has outstripped that for bicycles in recent years. So, in other words, uh, even biking, which is dangerous enough if you're biking on the road, when you're dealing with human beings, is just as bad and maybe even worse when it comes to these autonomous automobiles because the computer just doesn't recognize the bicycle as being some sort of an object that it has to get around. And human beings are very much in the same way because when you're driving, it's about perception. I heard some research years ago. I was interviewing a guy about motorcycles. Drivers coming down a road, your brain does not acknowledge that the guy on the motorcycle is the same as a guy in an automobile. Again, because you're seeing it's just two wheels and it's narrow. It's doesn't catch your eyes in the same way, which is why it's believed that oftentimes there are more accidents involving people on motorcycles with automobiles percentage wise than car on car because it's just the way your brain reads the situation. It's like when you're in fog, your brain is reading that you're not driving fast enough, so you continually speed up, and that's why there are a lot of big collisions that happen in fog, and sometimes multi car collisions that happen because people are doing that, and they don't have time to slow down. The other one I read was if you have like a white car or a silver car, and silver cars themselves, uh, I I I had a theory. And I developed it on my own. I bought a brand new silver car in 2004, I guess it was. And in the first 7 months I had it, two people hit me. One, I was sitting at an off ramp and I was sitting at a stop sign, and a guy with a big Ford Expedition just ran into the back, and the whole back end of my car fell off. That was highly unpleasant at the time. This is new cars are expensive, and you really want to take good care of them. It always seems to me that some other dunderhead out there always wants to ensure that they mess your new car up. I remember the first brand new car I ever bought in my life, and I parked it. I went to a grocery store, and I decided it's brand new, green, shiny paint on it with some, nice, call it piping, like some stripes going down the side that were gold. And there was this huge grocery store parking lot. So I parked because I didn't have a problem walking, a good exercise. I parked as far away as I could from the store because most people park up near the front. I parked on the opposite side of the parking lot. I was the only automobile on the back end of that parking lot. I walked all the way into the store, got my groceries, came all the way out, and I realized somebody had pulled in and decided to park right next to me, even though they could have parked 100 feet closer to the store, 150 feet closer to the store. And they managed to swing a door out and smack right into the door of my new car. Um, I was in a hurry, but I wanted to wait and just say to them, you know, is it common in your family that you're a moron? I mean, is it genetic? What is it that caused you to do that? Because you could have parked all the way up there and not damaged my brand new car. But I got curious after twice people hitting my silver car. And I got in touch with a friend who was serving in the state legislature at the time where I lived, and I asked her what she thought about it. She said, "It's funny you bring that up." She said, "We have some research we've been reviewing on that, and indeed silver automobiles, because oftentimes when you're out on the road, are fairly close in color to the pavement below, and people's brains don't register this in the same way. Therefore, they sometimes just simply they don't see that object in front of them, at least not quite in the same way, or maybe it's too late by the time they acknowledge it." 9:50, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We're up to 28. We'll see some of that ice on the roads obviously melt in the next few days. So I came across that story about self-driving cars. These things are not going to be perfect, apparently, for a long time, mainly because they're programmed by people, right? And people's perceptions aren't always perfect. And speaking of the revolution with computers and robotics and the like, this came from the French press agency, or Agence France Presse, or whatever it's called, AFP, but it's the French press agency. The headline was One Income for All, Far-Fetched or Future Fact. Now, I've been reading how people are saying that within 10 years, robotics will eliminate 90% of the jobs that people currently have. We were talking about this on the air a few months ago in the Ag Report, and we were talking about it on Tuesday with Steve Millington. The Northwest Nazarene University right here in Idaho has developed something called the Idabot, and it will replace a lot of those people who currently, those migrant workers in the fields. It's cheaper. You don't have to provide it with a place to sleep or feed it or do any of those things. It shows up for work on time, and it can work around the clock if you need it to do that. And some of these will just they'll crawl along between furrows in your fields, or they'll be able to hover above the ground because it's the similar technology we use with drones, and we already have drones doing soil research from the air. But these types of things are going to eliminate a lot of the need for farm hands and migrant workers, and just they'll be able to do all these measurements and calculations, and clearly will improve your yield, but also save you on labor costs. But self-driving vehicles, well, wait a minute. If you're a truck driver, I was always told, I had an uncle who was a truck driver, long haul, and another one who drove a milk truck, and they were paid really well for that type of work. And I seriously considered getting into it when I was younger, but my eyesight isn't very good, and I was worried about backing up. My Uncle Frank, he could take that 18-wheeler, and he could back that trailer right up and just put a perfect seal on the door at a loading dock. If I had tried that, I'm not so sure. I think probably there'd still be some carnage behind that they were trying to recover from some 40 years later. But these were jobs that were considered to be among the best in the country. And, of course, back in those days, they didn't have GPS, so my Uncle Frank could get away with a few things on the road, too, that you don't get away with today. But you've almost become autonomous or an automaton yourself as a driver because of GPS and governors on the engines. But if you think about it, if trucks are going to be driving themselves, how many millions of truck drivers across the country, not just long haul, not just milk truck drivers, but delivery drivers, UPS, FedEx, if the trucks can do all of these things on their own without you, and if you look at the Postal Service, much of it has gone automated. When I worked at the Postal Service for a year back in 2006 to 2007, or into 2007, there were 800 some thousand postal workers across the country. The number is about half that now, and it will get smaller as well. The other day, I was reading about these restaurants that will serve you food, and you don't have to have somebody there saying when you drive through the drive-through. You'll just drive up, you'll queue in a few numbers of what you want, feed your cash through just like at the self-checkout, and you'll drive up to the next window, and an arm will reach out, and you'll have your Big Mac that way. And in some parts of the country, they're already moving to that because, well, they don't want to pay $15 to $20 for minimum wage. So the robots are cheaper. And there's no way to stop all of this from happening. And these robots are propping up in so many businesses. That's the theory, is that in another just 10 to 15 years, and it may happen sooner. Some of these revolutions in technology, as soon as a new technology hits, it gets adopted so fast. I mean, we're barely able to keep up with it. So what will happen in the future if most of the jobs we currently have no longer exist? You might still have people repairing robots, but that's going to be about it. The writer says if robots and machine intelligence threaten to render many white-collar jobs obsolete, then what will people do for money? Now, that's white-collar. That's beyond even blue-collar jobs, which are going to be eliminated. Think about that. Mr. Trump is trying to bring back all of these manufacturing jobs. What if they just bring robots in and set up factories with robots in this country? Other than the robot repairman, who's going to have work? The writer says, enter the concept of a universal basic income, a flat sum paid to all regardless of your existing wealth or ability to work. It is one of those rare ideas that has support from both the libertarian right, which favors tearing up the welfare state, and the left wing. Finland is the furthest down the road. On January 1st, it started a 2-year trial to give 2,000 unemployed Finns a monthly unconditional payment of about $590 per month. Now, that wouldn't buy you much, but these people were probably already receiving some sort of unemployment benefit. I'd like to be the guy they come along to. We're doing a case study here, and we need 2,000 volunteers. We want you to stay home and guzzle beer, and here's a check. I actually have some friends who take them up on that. I know they certainly would. So this is what they're trying to find out is, will it work? And who will cooperate with this? Because if you're a moneymaker, Are you going to want them taxing you to turn around and give it to people who aren't working? Well, in the old days, we didn't want to do that, especially if someone was lazy. But what if people just can't find the work? And then it mentions, though, that these benefits can perversely discourage people from retraining in new fields or taking on lower paid work that society needs, such as care for the elderly. But what if robots start taking care of grandma in the nursing home? Then nursing goes away, which has been the fastest growing line of work in the country for decades now. I used to have to go every once a month when the labor statistics would come out. I used to have to go uh, interview a guy. His name was Evans, and I'd have to go see Mr. Evans. It was one of my jobs 25 years ago, and he was a wonderful guy. He was an analyst for the state labor department, and he would tell me he'd look at the dire warnings about all the jobs, but then he'd look up and he'd say, "But if you're in nursing, there's a lot of growth. But if the robot can handle that, then that job goes away." Here's the thing, though. If you paid everybody the same amount of money all over the world, what you get in your weekly paycheck is one thing. How you invest that money is another thing. Think about that for a moment. Just take a moment, step back, and think about that. How you invest that money. There are some people out there. If we all have, every week somebody comes along and gives us, I'll call it $800. They level everything out at about $40,000 a year. Well, somebody out there is going to say, okay, but I just saw a new technology I'd like to invest in. So in a couple of years, their new technology takes off. Not only are they getting their guaranteed income, the same amount of money you are, but the technology they invested in with the money they saved, some people are better savers than others, obviously. The technology takes off, they could be worth millions. Then what's going to happen? Will there be arguments that that's not fair from the American left or the worldwide left? Because someone had the gumption to go out and do that and help produce new technologies which could make our lives better? Man, we're opening up a can of worms here, and I don't think there's any way around this. This is going to be it may be one of the greatest problems ever facing humanity. And sometimes there's a word that's called intractable. It means that sometimes there are problems out there and you may not have a solution. 9:58, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 13. I think some people call you useless eaters then. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Hope you can join us. And, of course, Rush Limbaugh is coming up next, following Fox News at 10 o'clock. And then we'll have Sean Hannity following Fox at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Glenn Beck at 4. And then Dave Ramsey tonight, 7 until 10. All of that coming up on KLIX.